Captain Sarah Chun stared at the tactical display aboard the U.S. Defiance, watching red dots multiply across the star chart like a spreading infection. Each dot represented a hegemony fleet, and there were far too many of them. Admiral Morrison wants all senior staff in the war room, announced Lieutenant Torres from the communications station. Priority Alpha. Sarah nodded grimly. She had expected this call. The Third Hegemony War had been raging for 18 months, and humanity was losing badly. The alien coalition that called itself the Hegemony had superior numbers, better technology, and seemingly unlimited resources. Worse, they had made their intentions crystal clear from the start: complete human extinction. The war room buzzed with tension as senior officers from across the fleet gathered. Admiral Morrison stood at the head of the massive holographic table, his weathered face showing every one of his 60 years. Around the table sat the finest military minds humanity had produced, and Sarah could see the exhaustion in all their eyes. "Ladies and gentlemen," Morrison began, his voice heavy with the weight of command. "I'll get straight to the point. We're losing this war." The admission hung in the air like a death sentence. Everyone in the room knew it, but hearing it spoken aloud made it real in a way that hurt. Intelligence estimates put hegemony forces at 12 times our current strength. Morrison continued, highlighting sectors on the display. "They've broken through our outer defenses at Proxima, Kepler, 442, and Wolf, 359. Our colonies at New Geneva and Port Armstrong have gone dark. We estimate 15 million civilian casualties in the last month alone." Captain Rodriguez from the U.S. Vengeance leaned forward. "What about reinforcements from the core worlds? Surely Earth Command has reserves." Morrison's expression grew even grimmer. "Earth Command is recalling every available ship to defend the Sol system. They're writing off the outer colonies." He paused, letting that sink in. "Including us." The room erupted in angry voices. Sarah felt her own rage building. Abandoning the outer colonies meant abandoning millions of human beings to the hegemony's tender mercies. She had seen the aftermath of hegemony raids. They didn't take prisoners. "Sir," Sarah spoke up, her voice cutting through the noise. "What are our orders?" Morrison looked at her with something like respect. "We've been given discretionary authority. In simple terms, we're on our own. Our mission is to delay the hegemony advance by any means necessary and inflict maximum casualties before." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Commander Park from the U.S. Liberty cleared his throat. "Admiral, what exactly does any means necessary include?" Morrison's eyes swept the room, meeting each officer's gaze in turn. "Everything. Every weapon, every tactic, every dirty trick in the book. Command has lifted all restrictions on experimental weapons programs. The gloves are off." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. There were weapons in humanity's arsenal that had been deemed too dangerous, too inhumane to use. If Command was authorizing their deployment, things were worse than even she had imagined. "The hegemony thinks they've broken us," Morrison continued. "They think humanity is just another weak species that will roll over and die when faced with superior force. They're about to learn how wrong they are." The tactical display shifted, showing the current disposition of human and hegemony forces. The enemy fleets formed a massive arc, slowly but inexorably advancing toward the core worlds. Between them and Earth stood only a handful of human battle groups, outnumbered by odds that should have made victory impossible. "We have 3 weeks before the main hegemony force reaches the Centauri system," Morrison explained. "After that, it's a straight shot to Earth. Our job is to make those 3 weeks cost them so dearly that they'll think twice about what they're trying to accomplish." Dr. Elizabeth Kane, the fleet's chief science officer, activated her personal tablet and began speaking. "I've been working with the weapons development teams on several projects that might interest you. The first is something we call Prometheus rounds, kinetic penetrators enhanced with experimental fusion charges. They're designed to punch through hegemony shielding and detonate inside their hulls." She brought up a schematic on the main display. "The beauty is that they look like standard kinetic rounds on sensors. By the time the enemy realizes what they're facing, it's too late." Captain Williams from the U.S. Retribution whistled low. "What kind of yield are we talking about?" "Enough to crack a hegemony-heavy cruiser in half," Kane replied with a grim smile. Morrison nodded approvingly. What else do we have? Project Wildfire, Kane continued. Distributed AI-controlled torpedo swarms. Each torpedo contains its own tactical computer and can coordinate with thousands of others in real time. They're designed to overwhelm point defense systems through sheer numbers and adaptive behavior. Sarah leaned forward, studying the technical readouts. How many torpedoes per swarm? We've tested up to 10,000 per launch platform, Kane said. The AI can split the swarm, recombine it, create false targets, and adapt to enemy countermeasures faster than any organic crew could respond. The mood in the room was shifting. These weren't the weapons of a defeated force. They were the tools of a species that had decided it would rather burn down the galaxy than submit to extinction. Morrison brought up another display, this one showing asteroid fields throughout the system. We're also implementing something called the Sledgehammer Protocol. We're going to turn every significant asteroid into a kinetic weapon. Commander Park looked confused. Sir, asteroid bombardment is nothing new. The hegemony has countermeasures for that. Morrison's smile was cold. Not asteroids moving at 20% of light speed, they don't. We're using a network of hidden mass drivers to accelerate selected asteroids to relativistic velocities. By the time the hegemony detects the launch, the asteroids will impact within minutes. The implications were staggering. A single asteroid moving at 20% of light speed carried enough kinetic energy to sterilize a planet. The hegemony might have superior technology, but the laws of physics didn't care about their technological advantages. There's more, Morrison continued. We've been in contact with certain elements within the hegemony itself. Not all the member species are happy about the extermination order against humanity. Some are willing to provide intelligence, and a few might even switch sides if we can demonstrate that we're not as helpless as we appear. This was news to Sarah. The hegemony had always presented a united front in their propaganda. The idea that there were cracks in their alliance was both surprising and encouraging. Which species? Asked Captain Rodriguez. Morrison hesitated. The Kythan Collective has reached out through back channels. Apparently, they have philosophical objections to genocide. They're willing to share tactical intelligence and possibly provide safe harbor for human civilians. Dr. Kane brought up another schematic, this one showing what looked like a space station. The Kythan have also provided us with detailed information about hegemony ship designs. We've identified critical vulnerabilities in their power systems and life support. The new Wraith-class stealth ships are specifically designed to exploit these weaknesses. Sarah studied the plans. The Wraith ships were small, fast, and virtually undetectable. They carried minimal armament, but were designed for surgical strikes against specific targets. A small force of Wraith ships could potentially cripple an entire enemy fleet if they could get close enough. Morrison straightened, his voice taking on the tone of a man issuing final orders. Here's how this is going to work. We're going to split the fleet into 3 task forces. Task Force Alpha will engage the enemy in a series of running battles, drawing their attention and bleeding their forces. Task Force Beta will implement the Sledgehammer Protocol, turning this entire system into a killing field. Task Force Charlie will coordinate the stealth attacks and work with our Kythan contacts. He paused, looking around the room one more time. I want to be clear about something. We're not fighting to win anymore. We're fighting to make them pay such a price for victory that they'll think twice before attacking another human world. We're fighting to buy time for Earth to prepare its defenses. We're fighting to show the galaxy that humanity doesn't go quietly into the night. Sarah felt something stirring in her chest, a mixture of pride and determination that she hadn't felt since the war began. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and abandoned by their own government. But they were still here, and they were still fighting. Any questions? Morrison asked. Captain Williams raised his hand. Sir, what about the civilians still in the outer colonies? The evacuation ships. Morrison's expression softened slightly. We'll do everything we can to protect them. But our primary mission is to stop the hegemony advance. If we fail here, there won't be anywhere left to evacuate them to. The weight of that responsibility settled on everyone present. They weren't just fighting for themselves, or even for humanity as a whole. They were fighting for every man, woman, and child still trapped in the path of the hegemony war machine. One more thing, Morrison said as the meeting began to break up. The enemy expects us to behave like a civilized military force. They expect us to follow the rules of war, to show mercy, to pull our punches. They're about to learn that a species facing extinction doesn't have the luxury of civilization. Sarah remained behind as the other officers filed out, studying the tactical displays and trying to absorb everything she had learned. The next few weeks would determine the fate of humanity, and the responsibility was almost overwhelming. Captain Chun, Morrison called as she turned to leave. Yes, sir. I'm giving you command of the 1st Wraith Squadron. I need someone I trust to lead those stealth strikes. Sarah nodded, feeling the weight of command settling on her shoulders. Understood, sir. We won't let you down. Morrison's smile was tired, but genuine. I know you won't. Now go show the galaxy what happens when you back humanity into a corner. As Sarah left the war room, she felt a grim satisfaction building inside her. The hegemony wanted to exterminate humanity? Fine. But they were about to learn that extinction was a two-way street, and humans had always been exceptionally good at taking their enemies with them. The hegemony fleet emerged from hyperspace like a plague of metal locusts, their formation so vast it blocked out the stars. Fleet Commander Zachthull of the hegemony watched the tactical display from the bridge of his flagship, the Inexorable Judgment, with the satisfaction of a predator cornering wounded prey. Fleet Disposition Report. He commanded, his 4 arms working the command interface with practiced efficiency. 2,736 vessels present and accounted for. Commander, responded his tactical officer, a thin-limbed Veltar whose species had joined the hegemony after their own spectacular military defeat. Scouts report minimal human presence in the system. Perhaps 24 ships at most. Zachthull's mandibles clicked in amusement. The humans were even more pathetic than intelligence had suggested. His fleet outnumbered them by more than 100 to 1. This wouldn't be a battle. It would be an execution. Signal the fleet. Full advance formation. I want those human ships vaporized within the hour. As the massive hegemony fleet began its inexorable advance toward the inner system, they failed to notice the small objects drifting among the asteroids. The objects were dark, cold, and virtually undetectable against the cosmic background. They had been waiting for weeks, their crews living on recycled air and emergency rations. Captain Sarah Chun watched the enemy fleet approach from the bridge of the stealth ship Phantom. Around her, 12 other Wraith-class vessels maintained perfect silence, their crews holding their breath as literally thousands of enemy warships passed within weapons range. My God, whispered Lieutenant Hayes from the sensor station. There are so many of them. Sarah nodded grimly. Intelligence estimates hadn't done justice to the sheer scale of the hegemony force. But intelligence had also provided them with something precious, detailed information about hegemony ship vulnerabilities, courtesy of their Kythan contacts. Signal the fleet, Sarah ordered quietly. Execute Shadow Strike in 30 seconds. The 13 Wraith ships moved with deadly precision, their fusion drives barely registering on sensors as they closed with their targets. Each ship had been assigned a specific enemy vessel, not the largest or most powerful ships, but the ones that would hurt the most when they died. The Phantom slipped between 2 massive hegemony dreadnoughts like a ghost, its destination a seemingly insignificant support vessel hanging at the edge of the formation. According to Kythan intelligence, that ship housed the fleet's primary communications array and central tactical computer. Weapons range in 10 seconds, reported the tactical officer. Sarah felt her pulse quicken. Everything depended on the next few minutes. If the Wraith ships could take out their targets simultaneously, they could blind and confuse the entire hegemony fleet. If they failed, humanity's most advanced warships would be destroyed for nothing. 5 seconds. 4, 3, 2, execute. The Phantom's torpedo launchers spoke in unison, sending a spread of experimental Prometheus rounds directly into the enemy ship's reactor core. Around them, the other Wraith ships unleashed their own attacks, targeting command vessels, communication ships, and supply carriers. The explosions lit up space like newborn stars. The Prometheus rounds lived up to their name, punching through hegemony shielding as if it didn't exist before detonating with fusion fire inside their targets. In the span of 30 seconds, 13 critical ships vanished in brilliant fireballs. Suddenly, The mighty hegemony fleet was blind and deaf, its communications severed, and its command structure decapitated. Ships began colliding with each other as navigation systems failed. Formation discipline collapsed as individual captains tried to take control of their local units. But Sarah knew their window of opportunity was measured in minutes at most. All ships, scatter pattern Delta. Rendezvous at Rally Point 7. The Wraith ships vanished back into the darkness as quickly as they had struck, leaving chaos in their wake. On the bridge of the inexorable judgment, Fleet Commander Zakthul roared his fury as damage reports flooded in. 13 ships destroyed, including his primary communications array. His fleet was scattered across the system, unable to coordinate their movements. "How many human ships attacked us?" he demanded. The tactical officer's tentacles trembled as he worked his console. "Unknown, sir. Our sensors detected minimal energy signatures. Perhaps a dozen small vessels." Zakthul's eyes blazed with rage. A dozen ships had just humiliated a fleet of nearly 3,000. It was impossible, yet it had happened. "Find them. I want every human ship in this system destroyed." But even as he gave the order, the next phase of humanity's desperate plan was already beginning. Deep in the asteroid belt, massive hidden installations came online. The mass drivers had been constructed in secret over the past 6 months, powered by fusion reactors buried inside hollowed-out asteroids. Each installation could accelerate multi-kilometer rocks to 20% of light speed. Admiral Morrison watched the targeting data from his command ship, waiting for the optimal moment. The hegemony fleet was still reeling from the stealth attacks, their formations scattered and disorganized. "Perfect. Sledgehammer protocol is green," reported his tactical officer. 47 asteroids ready for launch. Morrison studied the enemy positions one more time. At 20% of light speed, the asteroids would reach their targets in minutes. Even if the hegemony detected the launch immediately, they wouldn't have time to evade. "Execute Sledgehammer." Across the asteroid belt, the mass drivers fired in sequence. 47 massive rocks, each weighing millions of tons, accelerated to velocities that turned them into kinetic weapons of unimaginable power. They were invisible to sensors until it was too late, simply dark objects moving through the darkness of space. The first asteroid struck a hegemony heavy cruiser amidships. At 20% of light speed, the impact released more energy than a nuclear weapon. The ship didn't explode. It simply ceased to exist, vaporized in an instant by the incredible kinetic forces involved. More impacts followed in rapid succession. Battleships that had survived countless conflicts were reduced to expanding clouds of superheated plasma. The hegemony formation, already disorganized by the stealth attacks, was torn apart as relativistic projectiles carved through their ranks. Fleet Commander Zakthul watched in horror as his fleet died around him. Ships that had seemed invincible moments before were being obliterated by weapons that shouldn't have existed. The humans weren't fighting like the defeated species they were supposed to be. They were fighting like cornered predators. "Sir, we're detecting massive energy buildup from the human battle group," his sensor officer reported. "They're launching something." On the display, the small human fleet was moving to attack position. Against any rational enemy, it would have been suicide. 24 ships against over 2,000 survivors of the asteroid barrage should have been a foregone conclusion. But Zakthul was beginning to learn that humans weren't rational. Captain Rodriguez aboard the UES Vengeance smiled grimly as his ship's experimental weapons came online. The wildfire torpedo swarms had been loaded and programmed with the tactical data from their Kythan allies. 10,000 AI-controlled torpedoes per ship meant his small fleet was about to unleash 250,000 guided weapons. "All ships report ready for wildfire launch," came the report from his communications officer. "Signal the fleet," Rodriguez ordered. "Time to show them what human ingenuity can accomplish. Launch when ready." The torpedo swarms erupted from the human ships like swarms of angry bees, each torpedo guided by its own tactical computer and linked to thousands of others in a distributed network. The AI controlling the swarms had been programmed with one simple directive: adapt and overcome. The hegemony point defense systems opened fire, filling space with energy beams and defensive projectiles. But the torpedo swarms learned from every shot, sharing information instantaneously and adjusting their approach vectors. What started as organized defensive fire quickly devolved into chaos as the swarms split, recombined, and created false targets faster than organic crews could respond. Individual torpedoes began making it through the defensive screens, impacting hegemony ships with devastating effect. But the real horror for the hegemony crews was watching their defensive systems grow less effective with each passing second as the AI adapted to their tactics. "Sir, the torpedo swarms are learning," reported a terrified Veltar officer aboard the inexorable Judgment. "They're counter-adapting to our defensive measures faster than we can implement them." Zakthul stared at the tactical display in disbelief. His massive fleet was being systematically dismantled by inferior numbers using impossible tactics. The humans weren't just fighting back, they were winning. "Recall all ships to defensive formation," he ordered. "We'll consolidate our forces and his words were cut off as a spread of Prometheus rounds punched through his flagship's shields and detonated inside the hull. The Phantom had returned for another strike, targeting the bridge section directly. As emergency systems struggled to contain the damage, Zakthul found himself face to face with a terrible realization. The humans weren't just defending themselves. They were teaching the galaxy a lesson about the price of threatening their species. But the battle was far from over. Even as his fleet reeled from the coordinated assault, reinforcements were already jumping into the system. The second wave of the hegemony advance included some of their most powerful warships, commanded by leaders who wouldn't underestimate human resolve. As the first phase of the battle concluded, Captain Sarah Chun surveyed the destruction from the Phantom's bridge. They had bloodied the enemy badly, but at terrible cost. 3 of the Wraith ships hadn't made it back from their missions, and the main battle group was taking heavy casualties as the surviving hegemony forces reorganized. "Signal Admiral Morrison," she ordered. "Phase 1 complete. Enemy force reduced by approximately 40%, but they're adapting to our tactics. Recommend implementing Phase 2 immediately." Morrison's voice came back strained but determined. "Acknowledged, Phantom. Phase 2 is already in motion. Dr. Kane sends her regards. She's about to introduce the hegemony to some of humanity's more creative ideas." Sarah nodded grimly. If Phase 1 had been about demonstrating human tactical innovation, Phase 2 would be about showing the galaxy what happened when humans decided that the rules of civilized warfare no longer applied. The hegemony had wanted to exterminate humanity. Now they were about to learn that extinction was a lesson humans were prepared to teach in return, one carefully planned atrocity at a time. Dr. Elizabeth Kane stood in the laboratory aboard the UES Defiance, her hands steady despite the chaos raging outside. Through the reinforced viewports, she could see the distant flashes of weapons fire as the human fleet continued its desperate dance with the hegemony forces. But her attention was focused on the device in front of her, something that had never been tested in combat, something that would either save humanity or damn it forever. "Final systems check complete," reported Dr. Yamamoto, her chief assistant. "The entropy generator is ready for deployment." Kane nodded, feeling the weight of what they were about to unleash. The entropy generator was theoretical physics made manifest, a weapon that attacked the fundamental forces holding matter together. It had been deemed too dangerous for testing anywhere near inhabited systems, but desperate times called for desperate measures. "Signal the Admiral," she ordered. "The package is ready for delivery." Admiral Morrison's voice crackled through the communications system. "Understood, Doctor. You have permission to deploy when ready. God help us all." Kane activated the device with a simple touch of her finger. Miles away, a specially modified torpedo launched from the Defiance's tubes, carrying its terrible cargo toward the heart of the hegemony fleet. The torpedo was designed to look like a standard nuclear warhead to enemy sensors. By the time the hegemony realized what they were facing, it would be far too late to do anything about it. Fleet Commander Zakthul watched the approaching torpedo with grim satisfaction. His fleet had finally organized an effective defense, and the human ships were being systematically destroyed. This single torpedo represented a last, desperate gesture by a dying species. "Point defense will handle it," his tactical officer reported confidently. But the torpedo wasn't trying to avoid the defensive fire. Instead, it accelerated directly toward the largest concentration of hegemony ships, accepting hits from energy weapons that should have destroyed it instantly. Zakthal felt a chill of unease. Why isn't it being destroyed? Unknown, sir. The torpedo appears to be absorbing the energy from our weapons somehow. The torpedo reached the center of the hegemony formation and detonated. But instead of the expected nuclear fireball, something far worse emerged from the explosion point. A sphere of absolute nothingness began expanding outward, consuming everything it touched. Ships that came into contact with the expanding sphere didn't explode or disintegrate. They simply stopped existing. Their atomic bonds were severed at the quantum level, reducing mighty warships to constituent atoms in microseconds. The entropy generator was working exactly as designed, and Dr. Kane watched in horror and fascination as her theoretical weapon became a reality. The expanding sphere of destruction was growing slowly but steadily, and there was no known way to stop it. "My God," whispered Dr. Yamamoto. "What have we done?" Kane forced herself to remain calm. The weapon had a predetermined duration. The sphere would collapse in on itself after exactly 3 minutes. But in those 3 minutes, it would consume everything within a 50-kilometer radius. On the Hegemony flagship, panic was spreading through the crew as they watched their escorts simply vanish into the expanding void. Fleet Commander Zakthal had seen many weapons in his long career, but nothing like this. The humans had created something that violated the basic laws of physics as he understood them. "All ships, emergency retreat," he ordered. "Maximum burn away from that thing." But even as the Hegemony fleet fled from the entropy generator, the next phase of humanity's plan was already in motion. Captain Sarah Chun guided the Phantom through the chaos, her crew working with deadly precision to target fleeing Hegemony vessels. The enemy ships were focused entirely on escaping the expanding sphere of destruction, leaving them vulnerable to carefully placed torpedo strikes. "Target the command ship," she ordered. "If we can take out their leadership, we can turn this retreat into a rout." The Phantom's enhanced sensors locked onto the inexorable judgment as it fled from the entropy generator. A full spread of Prometheus rounds launched from the stealth ship's torpedo tubes, their fusion cores primed for maximum damage. But Zakthal had learned from the earlier attacks. Point defense systems engaged the incoming torpedoes, destroying most of them before they could reach their target. Only 2 made it through, causing serious damage but failing to destroy the massive flagship. "Sir, we have hull breaches on decks 12 through 17, reported a damage control officer. "Engineering reports that the main reactor is operating at 60% efficiency." Zakthal's mandibles clicked in frustration. The humans were like parasites, striking from the shadows and vanishing before his forces could respond. But he still had the advantage of numbers, even after the devastating losses from the entropy weapon. "Signal the second wave," he ordered. "All reserves are to jump into the system immediately. I want every human ship destroyed before they can deploy any more of those abominations." Space rippled as hundreds of additional Hegemony warships dropped out of hyperspace. The second wave was composed of their heaviest vessels, ships that could withstand humanity's experimental weapons and dish out devastating punishment in return. Admiral Morrison studied the tactical display as the enemy reinforcements appeared. His fleet was down to 18 operational ships, and they were facing over 3,000 enemy vessels. By any rational calculation, the battle should have been over. But Morrison had one more card to play. "Signal the Kythan fleet," he ordered. "Tell them it's time to choose a side." Captain Sarah Chun watched in amazement as space shimmered and a new fleet appeared. Not the organic curves of Hegemony ships, but something different entirely. The Kythan vessels were geometric constructs of crystalline material that seemed to bend light around them. "This is Captain KRA of the Kythan Vessel Harmony's Edge," came a musical voice over the communications channel. "We stand with humanity in this dark hour." The arrival of the Kythan fleet sent shockwaves through both human and Hegemony forces. The Kythan had been members of the Hegemony for over 200 years, contributing their advanced defensive technologies to the Alliance. Their defection was unthinkable. Fleet Commander Zakthal stared at the tactical display in disbelief. They wouldn't dare. The Kythan have been loyal members of the Hegemony for centuries. But even as he spoke, the crystalline ships were moving into formation alongside the battered human fleet. Their weapons were different from anything he had encountered, beams of coherent energy that seemed to phase in and out of reality, striking targets that should have been protected by shields and armor. "Sir, the Kaiden are using quantum tunnel weapons," his science officer reported, voice trembling with fear. "They can strike through our defenses as if they don't exist." The battle took on a new dimension as the Kaiden ships demonstrated why they had been such valuable allies. Their defensive screens could absorb incredible amounts of punishment, while their weapons bypassed conventional defenses entirely. But the Kaiden had brought more than just ships. They had brought intelligence, detailed information about hegemony tactics, weaknesses, and command structures. "Captain Chun," came the musical voice of Captain Kra over a secure channel. "We have identified the enemy fleet's mobile command center. If you can disable it, we can sever their tactical coordination network." Sarah studied the target data streaming from the Kaiden ship. The mobile command center was heavily defended, but it represented a critical vulnerability. Without centralized command, the massive hegemony fleet would devolve into uncoordinated groups that could be defeated in detail. "Understood, Captain Kra." Phantom moving to attack position. The stealth ship slipped through the battle like a ghost, its crew pushing their vessel beyond safe operating parameters. They passed between massive hegemony dreadnoughts, exchanging fire with the Kaiden fleet, threading the needle between energy beams that could vaporize their ship in an instant. The mobile command center was exactly where Kaiden intelligence had said it would be, a massive vessel disguised as a simple supply ship, bristling with hidden sensors and communication arrays. It was the nerve center of the entire hegemony operation. "Full spread, all tubes," Sarah ordered. "Everything we have." The Phantom fired every torpedo in its inventory, emptying its magazines in a single devastating salvo. Prometheus rounds and standard warheads streaked toward their target, overwhelming the command ship's defensive systems through sheer volume of fire. The explosion that followed was visible across the entire star system. The mobile command center vanished in a ball of fusion fire, taking with it the hegemony's ability to coordinate their massive fleet. Almost immediately, the enemy formation began to fall apart. Individual ship commanders, cut off from central command, began making their own tactical decisions. Some tried to continue the attack, others moved to defensive positions, and still others began retreating toward the edge of the system. Captain Kra's voice came over the communications channel, filled with something that might have been satisfaction. "The enemy fleet is fragmenting. Now is the time to press our advantage." Admiral Morrison seized the opportunity. "All ships, advance by divisions. We're going to roll up their flanks while they're still confused." The combined human-Kaiden fleet moved forward with renewed determination. The hegemony still had overwhelming numbers, but without coordination, they couldn't bring their full strength to bear effectively. Dr. Kane watched the battle unfold from her laboratory, already preparing the next phase of humanity's response. The entropy generator had been their most devastating weapon, but it was far from their only surprise. "Doctor," came Admiral Morrison's voice over the intercom. "How quickly can you prepare another entropy device?" Kane checked her calculations. 12 hours minimum, sir. The quantum matrices need time to stabilize between deployments. Then, we'll have to hold them off with conventional weapons for now. Can you accelerate the process? Kane's smile was grim. "Sir, I can do better than that. We have other projects ready for field testing." She activated a new set of displays, showing weapon designs that had been considered too experimental for combat use. The war had changed the rules about what was acceptable, and humanity was about to introduce the galaxy to the full scope of their scientific creativity. "Signal the fleet," Kane ordered her assistants. "Project Pandora is authorized for immediate deployment." As the battle raged around them, neither side fully understood what they had unleashed. The humans had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed, deploying weapons that challenged the fundamental laws of physics. The Kaiden had betrayed their own alliance, fracturing the hegemony's unity for the first time in centuries. But, perhaps most importantly, humanity had demonstrated that they would never surrender, no matter how desperate the situation became. They had reached their limit and responded not with capitulation, but with fire, unrelenting, consuming fire that would either save them or burn down the galaxy in the attempt. The quantum laboratory aboard the UES Defiance hummed with barely contained energy as Dr. Kane made final adjustments to Project Pandora. Around her, technicians worked frantically to prepare the most ambitious weapon humanity had ever conceived, not just a single device, but an entire network of reality-altering machines that would turn the laws of physics into weapons of war. Final synchronization complete, reported Dr. Yamamoto, his hands trembling slightly as he worked the controls. All 12 Pandora nodes are online and ready for deployment. Kane nodded grimly. Project Pandora wasn't just dangerous to the enemy. It was dangerous to everyone in the star system, including the human fleet. Once activated, the quantum field generators would create pockets of altered space-time where the normal rules of physics no longer applied. Signal Admiral Morrison, she ordered. Pandora is ready, but I need to stress the risks one more time. Morrison's weathered face appeared on the laboratory's main screen, showing the strain of commanding a desperate battle. Behind him, damage reports scrolled past as his fleet continued its running fight with the hegemony forces. Doctor, we've already crossed every line we swore we'd never cross, Morrison said grimly. At this point, the only risk that matters is losing this war. Kane understood his position, but her scientific conscience demanded that she voice her concerns one final time. Sir, once we deploy Pandora, we won't be able to control what happens next. The quantum field effects will cascade through local space in unpredictable ways. We could accidentally tear holes in reality itself. Morrison's expression didn't change. And if we don't deploy it, humanity goes extinct in the next few hours. Deploy the weapon, Doctor. That's an order. Kane closed the channel and turned to her team. You heard the Admiral. Deploy Pandora nodes in Formation Delta. May God have mercy on us all. The 12 Pandora devices launched from hidden deployment bays throughout the human fleet, their sophisticated AI systems immediately beginning the complex calculations needed to establish overlapping quantum fields. Each node was no larger than a fighter craft, but together they would reshape the fundamental nature of space within a massive volume around the hegemony fleet. Fleet Commander Zach Thull watched the approaching objects on his tactical display with growing unease. His fleet had taken severe losses, but they still outnumbered the human forces by a significant margin. The addition of the Kythan traders had complicated matters, but not enough to change the ultimate outcome. Or so he thought. Sir, we're detecting massive quantum fluctuations from those incoming objects, his science officer reported, voice tight with confusion. I've never seen energy readings like this. Zach Thull studied the sensor data, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. The human devices were emitting energy signatures that shouldn't have been possible, creating patterns in space-time that defied every scientific theory he knew. Weapons free, he ordered. Destroy those devices before they reach their deployment positions. Point defense systems throughout the hegemony fleet opened fire, sending thousands of energy beams and projectiles toward the Pandora nodes. But as the weapons struck their targets, something impossible happened. The energy was absorbed and converted into fuel for the quantum field generators. Sir, our weapons are making them stronger, the tactical officer reported in horror. Before Zach Thull could respond, the Pandora network activated. Reality hiccuped. Within the quantum field boundary, the laws of physics became suggestions rather than absolutes. Hegemony ships found their weapons firing in reverse, energy beams flowing backward into their own reactors and causing devastating overloads. Defensive shields became prisons, trapping ships within their own protective barriers and slowly crushing them with gravitational forces that shouldn't have existed. One massive hegemony dreadnought attempted to turn away from the quantum field, only to discover that its engines were now propelling it backward through time instead of forward through space. The crew watched in terror as their ship began aging in reverse, hull plating becoming newer while their life support systems forgot how to function. Captain Sarah Chun guided the Phantom carefully around the edge of the quantum distortion, using the chaos to mask her approach toward the hegemony flagship. Inside the Pandora field, the normal rules of stealth were meaningless. Energy signatures fluctuated randomly, and sensor readings changed from moment to moment. My God, whispered Lieutenant Hayes from the sensor station. What have we done? Through the viewports, They could see hegemony ships trapped in impossible configurations, vessels that existed in multiple locations simultaneously, command bridges that were larger on the inside than the ships that contained them, and weapons that fired at targets in adjacent dimensions. "We've done what was necessary," Sarah replied, though her own voice carried doubt. Humanity had unleashed forces that they didn't fully understand, and the consequences were beyond anything they had imagined. The inexorable judgment shuddered as quantum fluctuations washed over its hull, causing entire sections of the ship to phase in and out of existence. Fleet Commander Zakthal found himself commanding a vessel that was simultaneously a mighty flagship and a small escape pod, depending on which quantum state was currently dominant. "Sir, we need to evacuate the fleet from this area immediately," his navigation officer reported, though the words came out backward and had to be mentally reversed to understand them. Zakthal tried to give the order, but found that cause and effect had been severed within the quantum field. His commands were being executed before he spoke them, creating a paradox that threatened to tear his ship apart at the molecular level. Outside the chaos of the Pandora field, Admiral Morrison watched the destruction with a mixture of satisfaction and horror. The hegemony fleet was tearing itself apart as the quantum effects cascaded through their formation, but he could see the field beginning to destabilize. "Dr. Kane, how long can we maintain the quantum field?" he asked over the communications channel. Kane's voice was strained as she fought to keep the Pandora network stable. "Maybe 10 more minutes, sir. The quantum matrices are overloading faster than we calculated. When they collapse, the backlash could dash." Her words were cut off as one of the Pandora nodes suffered a critical failure. The quantum field fluctuated wildly, causing a section of empty space to simply vanish, taking 3 hegemony ships with it. Captain Kare's musical voice came over the communications channel, tinged with what might have been concern. "Admiral Morrison, our scientists detect dangerous instabilities in the quantum field. We recommend immediate evacuation of all ships from the affected area." Morrison studied the tactical display, weighing the risks against the strategic advantages. The Pandora field was destroying the hegemony fleet more effectively than any conventional weapon, but it was also threatening to destabilize local space permanently. "All ships, withdraw to minimum safe distance," he ordered reluctantly. "Dr. Kane, begin shutdown procedures for Pandora." But even as the human and Kythan fleets pulled back from the quantum distortion, it was becoming clear that some of the hegemony ships trapped within the field were adapting to the altered physics. Their crews were learning to navigate the impossible conditions, using the quantum fluctuations to their advantage. The inexorable judgment had managed to stabilize its quantum state by synchronizing its systems with the field fluctuations. Fleet Commander Zakthal found himself commanding a ship that now existed partially outside normal space-time, giving him capabilities that no hegemony vessel had ever possessed. "Temporal weapons online," reported his tactical officer, who now existed in 3 slightly different timelines simultaneously. "We can strike the human fleet before they fire their weapons." Zakthal's mandibles clicked with grim satisfaction. The humans had given him the tools for his own victory. Target their command ship. Fire through the temporal distortion. Energy beams lanced out from the inexorable judgment, traveling backward through time to strike the UES Defiance before it could defend itself. But the attack had an unexpected consequence. The temporal weapon created a paradox that began unraveling the quantum field from within. Dr. Kane watched in horror as her instruments showed reality itself beginning to collapse. "Admiral, the quantum field is destabilizing catastrophically. We have maybe 2 minutes before space twisted," and suddenly, the hegemony flagship was gone, along with most of its escort fleet. The quantum field imploded with a flash of light that was visible across the star system, taking dozens of ships with it, and leaving behind a perfectly spherical void in space. The sudden silence that followed was deafening. In the span of a few minutes, both sides had lost massive numbers of ships to forces that neither fully understood. The hegemony fleet was reduced to scattered groups of survivors, while the human fleet had paid a terrible price for deploying weapons beyond their control. "Damage report," Morrison ordered, his voice hollow. 6 ships lost to quantum effects, sir," came the reply from his tactical officer. The Pandora network is completely destroyed. Dr. Kane's laboratory suffered a containment breach, but the crew survived. Morrison nodded grimly. They had dealt a devastating blow to the hegemony, but at a cost that was almost too high to bear. And he could see more enemy fleets approaching on long-range sensors, reinforcements that would arrive within hours. Captain Sarah Chun brought the Phantom back toward the human formation, her crew shaken by what they had witnessed. The quantum field had shown them glimpses of realities that shouldn't exist, possibilities that defied every law of physics they had ever known. Captain, Lieutenant Hayes said quietly, "What happens when word of this gets out? When the galaxy learns what we've done here?" Sarah considered the question carefully. Humanity had crossed a line today, deploying weapons that threatened the fundamental structure of reality itself. They had shown that a desperate species was willing to destroy the universe rather than accept extinction. "I think," she said finally, "that the galaxy is going to learn to leave us alone." But even as she spoke, Sarah knew that the battle was far from over. The hegemony still had reserves, and they would be coming for revenge. Humanity had revealed its most devastating weapons, but they had also revealed their limits. The next phase of the war would determine whether humanity's unrelenting fire would be enough to ensure their survival, or whether they had simply delayed their inevitable destruction while teaching the galaxy to fear them. Admiral Morrison stared at the tactical display, watching the scattered remains of both fleets try to reorganize themselves. The battle had been a victory, but it felt more like a funeral. They had saved themselves for now, but at a cost that would haunt humanity forever. "Signal the fleet," he ordered. "All ships prepare for the final phase. If we're going to do this, we're going to do it right." The war was entering its final chapter, and Morrison knew that only one species would survive to see its conclusion. The final hegemony fleet dropped out of hyperspace like an avalanche of steel and fury, their formation so vast it seemed to stretch from one horizon to the other. Supreme Commander Velthak of the Hegemony High Council had come personally to finish what lesser commanders had failed to accomplish, bringing with him every available warship from across the galaxy. Admiral Morrison studied the approaching armada from the bridge of the UES Defiance, his weathered face showing no emotion despite the impossible odds. His fleet consisted of exactly 11 functional ships against an enemy force that numbered in the tens of thousands. "Sir," his tactical officer reported quietly, "enemy fleet strength is approximately 15,000 vessels. They've brought everything: dreadnoughts, planet killers, world ships, and things our sensors can't even identify." Morrison nodded grimly. The hegemony had finally committed their full strength to humanity's destruction, holding nothing back. It should have been the end of the war, a foregone conclusion that would result in human extinction within the hour. Instead, it was about to become the galaxy's introduction to humanity's final weapon. "Dr. Kane," Morrison said into his communicator, "please tell me you have good news." The battered scientist's voice came back strained but determined. "The Phoenix Array is online, Admiral. All quantum resonators are synchronized and ready for activation. But, sir, I need to stress once more that this is completely untested. The theoretical models suggest it will work, but, Doctor," Morrison interrupted gently. "We're about to be wiped from existence. Untested is better than extinct." Dr. Kane was standing in what remained of her laboratory, surrounded by the most advanced technology humanity had ever created. The Phoenix Array wasn't just a weapon. It was a fundamental restructuring of how human ships interfaced with reality itself. Every vessel in the fleet had been fitted with quantum resonators that would allow them to tap directly into the zero-point energy field that permeated all of space. In theory, it would make them nearly invincible. In practice, it might tear them apart at the atomic level. "All ships report Phoenix Array installation complete," came the report from the communications officer. "Crews are standing by for activation." Morrison took a deep breath, feeling the weight of his species' survival on his shoulders. "Signal the fleet. Activate Phoenix Array on my mark." On the bridge of the Supreme Hegemony flagship Absolute Dominion, Supreme Commander Velthak watched the tiny human fleet with something approaching contempt. 11 ships against 15,000 was less a battle than an execution, and he intended to make it a memorable one. "Signal all forces," he ordered, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had never known defeat. Total orbital bombardment pattern. I want every human ship reduced to component atoms. This ends now. The massive hegemony fleet opened fire in unison, unleashing enough destructive energy to glass a planet. Thousands of energy beams, projectiles, and exotic weapons converged on the small human formation, creating a light show that was visible from neighboring star systems. The attack should have obliterated the human fleet instantly. Instead, something impossible happened. Phoenix Array, activate, Morrison ordered calmly. The quantum resonators aboard each human ship suddenly flared to life, tapping into the infinite energy of the zero-point field. The incoming hegemony weapons struck not vulnerable metal hulls, but force fields powered by the fundamental forces of reality itself. Energy beams that could punch through battleship armor were absorbed and redirected. Kinetic projectiles struck barriers that existed in 11 dimensions simultaneously and simply ceased to exist. Exotic weapons designed to tear apart molecular bonds found themselves fighting against forces that held galaxies together. The human ships began to glow with an inner light as the Phoenix Array reached full power, each vessel now drawing more energy than some stars produced. They were no longer just warships. They had become conduits for forces that the galaxy's greatest scientists barely understood. Captain Sarah Chun felt the transformation as the Phantom systems came fully online. Her ship was no longer constrained by the normal limitations of matter and energy. She could feel the zero-point field flowing through the vessel's hull, offering possibilities that defied imagination. All weapon systems showing infinite energy availability, reported her tactical officer, voice filled with awe. We're reading power levels that shouldn't be possible. Sarah smiled grimly. Then, let's show them what impossible looks like. Target the enemy command ship. The Phantom's weapons fired, but instead of standard energy beams, they projected focused distortions in space-time itself. The attack crossed the distance to the absolute dominion not by traveling through space, but by folding space around the target and striking from 11 directions simultaneously. Supreme Commander Velthak watched in horror as his flagship's shields simply ceased to function, reality itself turning against his defenses. The human attack didn't just penetrate his armor, it made the armor forget how to exist. Sir, we're taking damage on all decks, his tactical officer reported. But the sensors show no weapon impacts. It's as if the ship is spontaneously disintegrating. Across the hegemony fleet, similar reports were coming in. The human ships were no longer fighting according to any known laws of physics. Their weapons reached through shields as if they weren't there. Their movement defied the normal limitations of acceleration and momentum, and their defenses seemed to be powered by the universe itself. Dr. Kane monitored the Phoenix Array's performance from her laboratory, watching readouts that would have seemed like fantasy just hours before. Each human ship was now drawing power directly from the quantum foam that underlied reality, making them functionally invincible as long as the system held together. Admiral, all ships are operating within acceptable parameters, she reported. The array is stable and responding to tactical commands. Morrison nodded, then opened a general communications channel to the entire hegemony fleet. It was time for humanity to send a message that would echo across the galaxy for millennia to come. Supreme Commander Velthak, Morrison's voice carried across space with crystal clarity. This is Admiral Morrison of the United Earth Navy. You came here to exterminate my species. You believed that overwhelming force would guarantee your victory. You were wrong. On the bridge of the absolute dominion, Velthak stared at the tactical display in disbelief. His massive fleet was being systematically destroyed by 11 ships that shouldn't have been able to scratch his paint, much less threaten his existence. Admiral Morrison, he replied, his voice tight with controlled fury. You may have delayed your extinction, but you cannot prevent it. The hegemony has resources you cannot imagine. Morrison's laugh was cold and sharp. Commander, you still don't understand what you're facing. This isn't just about humanity anymore. You've forced us to evolve beyond the limitations that once defined us. We've become something new, something that your empire can't comprehend or defeat. As if to prove his point, the U.S. vengeance suddenly accelerated to impossible speeds, crossing the distance between the two fleets in seconds and appearing directly alongside the absolute dominion. Captain Rodriguez's ship existed in multiple spatial dimensions simultaneously, making it effectively untouchable while allowing it to strike from any angle. "This is impossible," Velthak roared as his flagship shuddered under attacks that his sensors couldn't even detect. "No species can simply ignore the laws of physics." Morrison's voice came back with deadly calm. "The laws of physics are suggestions when you have infinite energy at your disposal. And we're about to teach you exactly what that means." The human fleet began to move as one, their ships dancing through space with grace that defied every principle of momentum and inertia. They struck at the hegemony formation from impossible angles, appearing inside enemy vessels and firing from within, phasing through solid matter to reach critical systems, and using weapons that attacked targets in the past, present, and future simultaneously. Captain Kra of the Kaiden fleet watched the battle with something approaching religious awe. Her people had spent millennia studying the fundamental forces of reality, but they had never imagined that any species could harness them so directly. "Captain Chun," she transmitted on a secure channel, "what have your people become?" Sarah considered the question carefully as she guided the Phantom through a complex attack pattern that involved existing in 17 different timelines at once. "We've become what we always were underneath," she replied finally. "Survivors. The difference is that now we have the tools to match our determination." The hegemony fleet began to break apart as individual commanders realized the futility of their situation. Ships that had served with distinction for centuries were being obliterated by forces they couldn't understand, much less fight. Panic spread through the ranks as crews discovered that their most powerful weapons were useless against enemies that existed outside normal spacetime. Supreme Commander Velthak made one final, desperate gambit. "All ships, concentrate fire on the human command vessel. If we can destroy their leader Dash," his words were cut off as the UES Defiance simply ceased to exist in his reality, stepping sideways through dimensions before reappearing directly in front of his bridge viewport. Admiral Morrison's ship existed simultaneously at point-blank range and thousands of kilometers away, allowing it to fire with perfect accuracy while remaining completely invulnerable to return fire. "Commander," Morrison said quietly, his voice carrying directly into Velthak's mind through quantum entanglement, "your war is over. The question now is whether you're going to retreat with the remnants of your fleet, or force us to demonstrate just how thorough our victory can be." Velthak stared into the infinite depths of space, watching his mighty armada dissolve like mist before the power of humanity's evolved technology. In a matter of hours, 15,000 ships had been reduced to scattered wreckage and fleeing survivors. "All ships," he said finally, his voice hollow with defeat, "general retreat. Emergency hyperspace, jump to rally point Omega." The surviving hegemony ships began disappearing into hyperspace, their crews carrying with them tales of an enemy that had transcended the normal limitations of matter and energy. Word would spread throughout the galaxy of humanity's transformation, of a species that had chosen evolution over extinction. Admiral Morrison watched the enemy fleet flee, then activated the Phoenix Array's shutdown sequence. The incredible power flowing through his ships gradually decreased to normal levels, though he knew that the technology would never be truly turned off. Humanity had crossed a threshold from which there could be no return. "Dr. Kane," he said into his communicator, "what's our status?" Kane's voice came back tired but triumphant. "All ships intact, sir. The Phoenix Array performed beyond our most optimistic projections. We could probably hold this position against the entire galaxy if necessary." Morrison nodded slowly. That was exactly what worried him. Humanity now possessed the power to reshape reality itself, making them effectively godlike by the standards of any other species. The responsibility that came with such power was almost overwhelming. "Signal the fleet," he ordered. "Set course for Earth. It's time to go home." As the human ships began their journey back to the core worlds, Captain Sarah Chun reflected on what they had accomplished. They had saved their species from extinction, but at a cost that was only beginning to be understood. Humanity was no longer human in any traditional sense. They had become something new, something that the galaxy would either worship or fear. Captain KRA's musical voice came over the communications channel one last time. Admiral Morrison, what will humanity do now that you possess such power? Morrison considered the question carefully before answering. The same thing we've always done, Captain. We'll survive, we'll grow, and we'll protect those who can't protect themselves. The universe has just become a much safer place for anyone who values freedom. As the combined fleet moved toward home, news of humanity's victory was already spreading throughout the galaxy. The hegemony's defeat had shattered the alliance that had dominated galactic politics for centuries, and new powers were beginning to emerge in the vacuum left behind. But, for the first time since the war began, humanity could look toward the future with confidence rather than desperation. They had reached their limit and responded with unrelenting fire that had forged them into something stronger than they had ever imagined possible. The war was over, but humanity's real journey was just beginning.